What happens when you have done everything you were told to do? You were a good student, you got yourself through high school, college, master's degree, and even a PhD. And then you arrive at this moment where you are staring at a question that you don't feel adequately prepared for. What comes next? For many PhDs, that question is heavy. I've been there because it carries a lot more than career uncertainty. It carries so many feelings with it, feelings of fear, grief, shame, and even a quiet, sometimes not so quiet, sense of panic, especially when the academic path you were trained for turns out to be far narrower than you were led to believe. Let me guess. You were led to believe that you would be the exception, not the rule. And then you realize, hold up. I am not the exception. Most of us are not getting tenure track jobs. Most of us have to plan for a career outside of academia. What am I supposed to do? If this is something that you're starting to think about, if you've arrived at a point in your graduate program where you're starting to consider the next steps, you are not going to want to miss this episode. It is a really, really good one. Welcome to the award-winning Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on inclusive grad school stories and learn about personal development and productivity tips. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, a certified coach, consultant, and author, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with insider knowledge to help you reach your personal and professional goals. Welcome back, everyone, to the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette. Today, we're talking about all things career design and career planning beyond academia. I'm joined by a special guest who brings so much knowledge and lived experience to this topic. Her name is Dr. Gertrude Nonterah. Dr. Gertrude holds a PhD in microbiology and immunology from Lewis Katz Temple University School of Medicine. She is the founder of the Bold PhD Consulting and host of the Bold PhD Podcast, which has been streamed in over 50 countries. Through her keynotes, workshops, and storytelling, she supports PhDs in designing careers beyond the ivory tower, grounded in clarity, agency, and self-trust, rather than panic or prestige. Oh, yes, I am so happy to have her today. And in this conversation, we were pretty open and honest and candid about what it means to design a career instead of waiting to be chosen. We talked about how to translate PhD skills into roles without feeling like you need to shrink yourself. We also talked about why networking, visibility, and opportunity building matter and how to approach it without feeling icky about it. We also talked about how PhDs can create more than one path forward in an increasingly uncertain job landscape. So again, this episode is about realizing that your PhD is not a dead end or a trap. It is a foundation you can build on, and you can do that in multiple ways. Let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Dr. Gertrude Nonterah. Today, we are talking about what comes after the PhD. Career planning for life beyond academia. We're going to jump straight into first question. We would love to hear more about your journey. So I know that you started out thinking you wanted to be a pediatrician, then went on to get degrees in biology, nursing, and ultimately a PhD in microbiology and immunology. But then you faced a season of unemployment after a postdoc funding ran out. I'm sure some listeners might relate to that circumstance as we speak. And it sounds like that experience shifted not only your career path in science communications and medical writing, but also It sparked your mission to help other PhDs design careers that they genuinely want instead of feeling trapped. I'm curious, what was it about that moment that compelled you to begin talking publicly about post-PhD career planning? Because so many folks go through similar transitions, but not everybody decides, I'm going to go public with this and share this with other folks.
Thank you, Dr. Yvette, and thanks for having me on the podcast. So, to answer your question, I think the reason why I decided to go public or talk about it is I've always loved to teach. This is one of the reasons why initially, like, I wanted to be a pediatrician because there's a lot of teaching in medicine. And also, when you come into academia, there's a lot of teaching. So, I was excited about being in the space of teaching people, right? And so when that postdoc well, the postdoc didn't fail, it's just funding ran out and we all had to be laid off. When it ended and initially I had thought, because I had run my all the way through academia, going from from high school to undergrad and then a PhD. I hadn't really spent a lot of time in the world working, right? I had just been in academia. And all throughout that experience, there really wasn't any career development. I didn't see a lot of that. Yes, there were career offices on the campuses that I was a part of, but there were no intentional, hey, come around, let's talk about careers that are you can potentially go into. That wasn't a thing when I was getting my PhD. And this was between 2009 and 2015. So not too long ago. There wasn't that. And so when the postdoc ended and I found myself struggling to find another job, I was like, what's wrong here? There's something wrong. There's something wrong with me. I think I'm smart. I think if I wasn't, maybe I wouldn't have gone to get a PhD. So why doesn't anybody want to hire me? And then I just read some random blogs online. I realized, maybe I'm not communicating my value enough through my resume, because at the time I was applying for both academic and non-academic jobs. And I was using this very, very academic focused CV. Well, nobody on the academic side paid attention to me and nobody on the non-academic side paid attention to me. But then I had read something about, I think it was on LinkedIn or some blog, about boiling down your resume to one page and focusing on the skills that those people required. So it was just in passing. And I was like, okay, let me try this out, because it's been a year and a half of me looking for jobs and I haven't been very successful. At the time for a very short while, I did teach at a community college, but it didn't pay a whole lot. And so I changed up my resume and changed it up from a CV to a resume, which is two different things. And all of a sudden I was getting responses. So I was like, what in the world? And why don't more people talk about this? So I started to post about, and I didn't realize there were a bunch, because up until then, very few people talked about going through unemployment as a very educated person. And so when I began to talk about it on LinkedIn specifically, all of a sudden there was this response, and I realized that there was this gap that needed to be addressed. So that's how I got into it a bit. It was kind of by accident.
It's interesting because you mentioned that this was happening for you from 2009 to 2015. Is that right?
Yeah, my PhD was from 2009 to 15. And from 15 to 18, I was in a postdoc. And it was in May of 2018 that we got laid off. Not just me, but, an entire lab got laid off. And from 2018, May 2018 until January 2020, I didn't have a job. I didn't have a job.
Oh, that added context helps. I was going to say that it's interesting because it might sound like it was a while ago when you were talking about the career development piece, how that was lacking at perhaps in your program, but also at your greater institution. And that continues to be true today,
Right.
even though it's been well over a decade. There's not a lot of emphasis in the career center space to support PhD students. And similarly, a lot of departments don't task themselves with that to support their students with exploring different careers. So that leaves a lot of PhD students, including folks who might be listening today, with this feeling of anxiety around the question of, like, how do I plan for what's next?
Right.
We know from experience, you and I, that traditional academic paths are limited, that most folks will not end up in a tenure track or tenured position.
Right.
And yet the non-academic pathways continue to feel very elusive.
Right.
So I would love to hear your thoughts on what you consider to be career design. So first, if you can let us know what that means and how you can use it as a tool for helping PhD students and even postdocs reduce their anxiety and increase their sense of agency during and after the PhD.
This is such a great question. Thank you. Thank you for it. So I think, for most of us, right, especially if you've gotten to the doctoral level, we have been sold I don't want to say it's a lie, but we've been sold this half truth that as long as you work hard, right, people will pick you. And this is true within the academic system. When you work hard, generally you're rewarded with good grades, you're rewarded with honors awards, there is some kind of reward. However, in the work world, this is not always the situation. And it can be very, very jarring. At least it was jarring for me. When you come out into the work world and you're looking for jobs and you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought all along getting these straight A's and doing well in school and proving that I was, worthy of being in an academic system meant that I was smart enough for the work world. But these are two completely different things. The academic system is very sheltered, right? We have this kind of artificial system where you effort in, effort out. However, in the work world, it's not always like this. And so I always think about it like, in academia or in the educational system, it's a stepwise progression. Every year, as long as you work hard, you move up a step. Every year, as long as you work hard, you move up a step. However, in the corporate world and even within academic work systems, it's more amorphous. Yes, there is an upward progression, but there's no correlation with how hard you work is how high you're going to go, right? And therefore, it's really important for you to be intentional about thinking about what your career is going to look like, right? It's really important to not. I remember a few weeks ago, I saw somebody post on LinkedIn and she was lamenting the fact that she'd been applying for jobs in industry and was being ignored. And she was saying that why aren't these companies more prepared to assimilate PhDs? And I didn't respond to that. But in my mind, I was thinking it's not their jobs. They don't care, right? They just want somebody who solves their business problem. So we can sit down and moan all we want about why doesn't industry notice how hard I work? Industry doesn't care about how hard you worked. They just don't. And this is where the concept of career design comes in. Taking charge of your own career and saying, okay, I'm taking charge. Yes, I'm doing well in school. I'm writing this amazing dissertation. I'm doing this amazing research. But in the context of the work world, how does that translate? How does that make me prepared to solve problems for whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit or for a university, wherever you choose to go, right? So that's the concept of career design, is really taking charge of your career, realizing that the stepwise progression we have in academia is not the same. It's not a mirror image of what happens out in the work world. So once you do that, then there are several steps that you should take. And I'm sure you'll ask me more questions about that. But that's career design in a nutshell. Is really intentionally taking charge of your career.
I would love to follow up by hearing more about those steps and also align it with how you usually refer to career design as something that needs to be intentional. And so I'm curious, what does it mean for someone to be intentional with designing their career? And what steps can they take to get there?
Great. This is such a good question. So there are a few steps, right? And I always think of it as a career toolbox that we all have. And in this career toolbox, you have a hammer, you have a screwdriver, right? You have the little thing the spanner that kind of like takes the bolts out. You have all of these tools in the toolbox. Now, you may not need all the tools, right, every single time for every single job, but knowing that you have the toolbox is crucial. Now, what are in your toolbox? The first thing that is in your toolbox, of course, is your degree. But not just your degree, all the skills and knowledge from your degree. So, for instance, I'm going to use myself as an example. I have a PhD in microbiology and immunology. For the longest time, I used to lead with that. I used to lead with the fact that the PhDs in microbiology and immunology. So all the jobs I was looking for, I was hoping to find something in microbiology or immunology. But the reality is that the skills that the path I gathered on my way to getting that PhD and the knowledge can take me beyond just careers in microbiology and immunology. What do I mean? So within this PhD, I had a lab-based PhD. That meant I run a lot of lab experiments. I worked with mice. I extracted tissues. I processed these tissues. I ran these quantitative experiments like qPCR. So I had all these skills that I picked up whilst I was getting the PhD. So your PhD is just a container for all of this plethora of skills and knowledge that you've gathered. And so when you go looking for a job, you're not just looking for a job in your field per se. You're looking for a job where you can utilize the skills and knowledge that you've gathered. So that's your first tool. And as you can see, this first tool is a tool with subtools, right? Right. So that's the first tool, is your degree. The second tool is your network, right? And when I talk about network, sometimes people get scared of this word because they think about slimy business people in business suits exchanging business cards. And that's not really it. When I talk about networking, I'm talking about relationship building that builds your career. Right. And I think sometimes people make it too transactional, and that's why it is scary. Right. Instead of making that transactional, I remember before I came on this podcast, just to use this as an example, Dr. Yvette, you reached out to me and said, hey, one of my friends talked about you and I've kind of noticed you on LinkedIn. I'd love to just connect and chat. And we got on Zoom and we connected and we had a really nice half-hour conversation. And then you threw it out there, if I wanted to be on the podcast, I should let you know. It wasn't transactional. It was just really a conversation of two people getting to know each other. And so I challenge people to do this is if you find somebody whose work you admire, whose career path maybe you want to emulate, reach out to them. There are a lot of people that will be willing to chat with you. I used to do this a lot. These days, my bandwidth is limited, so I can't do it as much. But I remember in 2020, 21, 22, when I was just starting out within medical communications, there were PhD students and postdocs and even more seasoned academics who reached out to me, and I got on Zoom with them and chatted with them for like 20, 30 minutes. And those people became a part of my network and vice versa, right? And so what happens there is you're not looking for an immediate payoff, right? When I chatted with Yvette, it didn't immediately jump on a podcast. It took a few months, actually, right? And so it's going to take some time, but this is an action you want to make an organic part of your life, because people connect people with opportunities. And that's the reality. And with the rise of online job applications, people sometimes say, hey, as long as I apply to, many jobs, eventually something will click. Not always, right? Sometimes positions, and a lot of the time, not sometimes, a lot of the time positions are filled by people that you know. Let me tell you a quick story. So when I was a postdoc at UC San Diego, I used to carpool with this group of ladies so that we would save on gas. All of us would save on gas. So we carpooled from our neighborhood. One of the people who was in that carpool was an HR person who worked at the medical school where I was doing my postdoc. And I don't know how this came up, but one day we were having this conversation and she said, we never hire professors unless another professor within the medical school recommends them. And I was like, really? And she said, yeah, we usually will go based on recommendations from somebody within the school. And there was one time that she hired somebody who had only applied online and they didn't have a referral. And it didn't work out for them at that school. Now, I know that our minds can go in several directions when she told me that, because I'm like, well, why didn't they fit in? Is there some kind of cabal that they didn't fit in with? Anyway, and there was a lot. But this is the reality. This was an HR person telling me that the reality is if you want to be a professor here, you kind of need to be at least recommended by one person within the school. And then within a few months, there was another researcher within our department who ended up going to intern. He was a younger researcher. He was an undergrad researcher and went to intern for a company outside of academia. And he came and he said, you know what's interesting at this internship? And we're like, well, he's like, I was talking to these scientists and they were like, if you don't know anybody here, the chances of you getting into this company is like 21%. But if you do, it goes up to about 70%. And I was like, really? So these patterns kept on showing up where if you knew someone within the school or within the company, it was more likely that it wasn't impossible, but it was more likely that you would get the job. And that really taught me the essence of building a network. And this is why I'm saying that that's the second tool in your toolbox is get to know people. Not everybody is going to benefit from your career, but even you may find opportunities that somebody may be a great fit for. And usually you want to give it to people that you know, right? You don't just want to give it to a random person because it reflects on you if that person shows up badly, right? So that's the second tool. Then I just talk about these three tools. So I've talked about your degree, your networking, and then I really do believe in showing your work, right? What do I mean by showing your work? Showing your work as in having some kind of personal brand. Now we all have personal brands, right? But whether you choose to cultivate that online is up to you, right? There's several ways to do this, but personally, I have really enjoyed showing my work on LinkedIn. Before I got into scientific writing and medical communications, I would write articles for clients because I was unemployed and so I was freelancing. But I would write these articles for clients and I would share them through LinkedIn. And this is one of the ways that I got people to know that I was a science writer, right? And so by showing my work on LinkedIn, by sharing that, you don't need to be an influencer. You're not trying to gather followers. You're just really building a hub where people can check out your work before they even reach out to you. And opportunities have come to me, not because I applied for them, but because somebody looked at my online work or the work I was sharing and was like, I think you might be a great fit for ABC. And those opportunities have come my way. So that's the third tool I'll talk about it. There's several other tools, but these are the main tools that I wanted to share.
These are really great. And I have a few follow-up questions because you started out by talking about the degree, and I appreciate you making the distinction between skills and knowledge because so many, especially PhD students, get so caught up with their subject area expertise that they lose sight of the skills that they do have.
Very much.
And then I also appreciate you talking about networking because so many people I know, and I myself felt this way before, feel like it's icky or slimy, but really it doesn't have to be, and it's a necessary component of your career design. And then showing your work, I think that might be the trickiest one for folks because so many people are not accustomed to being so visible or public facing, but it can certainly help with their thought leadership. To go back to that first piece of it, of the skills as opposed to subject area expertise, I know that a lot of PhD students will say something along the lines of, oh, I wasn't trained for anything outside of academia. Or like you and like me, they probably are grad students, but they don't have any job experience outside of academia. And so how should these individuals be thinking about their skills, about their experiences, so that they can start to think about themselves in roles outside of the academy? Because I know that's the trickiest part, is that translation piece.
Yeah, I'm going to refer people to a really great resource that I got to be a part of. It's not housed on my website or anything, but there's a company called Publication Academy. I think their name is also Higher Ed Plus. They have a free series that they made me moderate, and it was a series where I interviewed 50 PhDs or 50 academics across different disciplines, including the humanities, including science, including life science, including the hard sciences. So it was across the board, right? 50 different PhDs. I would say first of all, I'd say go check out that resource. Maybe I'll send you the link, Yvette, and then you can leave that resource for them. And then also, I have my own series on the Bold PhD podcast where I interview people who have varied backgrounds and are doing varied things. So, first of all, is like you said, Yvette, is for people to not really think about their degree as a box. I always tell people this, like, whatever box you create for yourself is self-imposed. Don't create, of course, like if you were trained as a sociologist, you're not going to get up tomorrow and become a surgeon. No. But within that degree and skill set that you develop, there are so many things that you can do. So for instance, let me give you a few examples. There was somebody who had trained in social psychology, and that's all she had done. That's all she knew. She'd never worked outside of academia. However, but she knew she didn't want to work in academia because, within academia, sometimes the really good jobs are kind of restricted location-wise, and she didn't really want to move. And so she thought about what else she could do. And she played a video game. There was a video game anime that she played. And she, one day, just playing the game, was like, wait, does this company that owns this video game, do they have jobs? And so she went on their website and looked at the career section, and they did have jobs. And they had a market research associate job. So she was like, wait a minute, I'm a social psychologist. I am a researcher. I have the skill of being able to research, being able to look at data, and being able to extract meaning from that data. That's what this market associate job is requiring that we do the research, we look at the data, and we make decisions. So I'm going to apply for it. And she did, and she got it with the video game company the video game company. And did she train in video games? No, but she did train as a researcher. And because she had those skills as a researcher, she was able to showcase on her resume and through her interview process that this is what I can bring, right? So always be thinking about what can you bring? What can you bring that solves that problem for that company, for that nonprofit, wherever it is that you want to go? Think about the problems that you solve. I always challenge people to think of themselves as problem solvers rather than a job seeker, right? And very much so, because as PhDs, our whole training is around problem solving. But it's been it's so ingrained in us that it's just within the four walls of academia that this works. But no, this can work outside of it. You may just need to rethink how it's packaged. But you're not just a PhD in English. You're not just a PhD in social psychology. You're not just a PhD in sociology or biology. You are the person that has these very, very distinct skills. And I always come back to that. Very distinct skills that solve problems. So think of yourself as that problem solver and look at how. So I challenge people always to really read read job descriptions, right? Not just to look at the job title and be like, oh, I could apply for that. No, read the job description. And as you read the job description, take note of the places where your skills fit, your knowledge fits, and then present yourself as that individual who can help them achieve what they want in the job description. So that's how I think about it. And that's how I got my first science writer job. So for my first science writer job, I had finally, after a year and a half, I had learned my this lesson. And I talked about boiling down my CV was like a 4 or 5 page CV down to 1 page. Now on this resume, I highlighted the exact skills that the job description was asking for. I read the job description. They needed somebody who had either an MS or PhD in the sciences. They needed somebody who had writing skills. They needed somebody who knew how to write on social media. I'd been doing that. So that's exactly what I put on there. Now, I didn't know, I'll tell you what, a lot of academics, we lead with our education on our resumes, literally, right? We have our PhD, MS, bachelor's degree on top of that. I challenge you to shift some of that around. This is how I did it. I wrote down I wrote down or crafted all my experiences up until that point in light of what the employer was looking for. And I put my education at the very bottom. So my education was the last thing on there. And I really leaned into, they need me to solve a problem. So let me show them that I've solved this type of problem before, just in a different context.
If you've been feeling stuck, scattered, or like that big project you have to get done this semester keeps getting pushed to the side, then I want to invite you to my next retreat. This March 20th and 21st, I'm hosting my next Compassionate Accountability Retreat. It's a virtual small group space designed to help you make meaningful progress on a long-term project without any unnecessary guilt or shame. You'll gain access to structured work time alongside other first-gen grad students and professionals. Whether you're drafting a manuscript, working on a conference presentation, polishing application materials, or returning to a creative project, this retreat is about making time for the work that matters most right now. As a podcast listener, you can take advantage of the early bird discount and receive 20% off your registration. Just use the code EARLYBIRD26 at checkout. This rate is available through February 21st, and the retreat is intentionally capped at 12 participants, with several spots already filled. You can learn more and register at gradschoolfemtoring.com/retreats or at the link in the show notes. I do like that you offer this concept to folks, regardless of whatever field that they're in or whatever they're trained in, that if they focus on this idea of solving problems and what can I bring to the table that solves problems, they can start to take a look at job descriptions and then convert their CVs into very succinct, tailored resumes that can potentially get them a job. And then tie that in with the other things that you mentioned around the networking and showing your work. Those are all really, really great things to put together. And it makes sense why you have been so successful at securing positions outside academia. So let's go back to this topic of networking because it is so important. And it's so hard for so many of us. It's still a challenge for me, even though I know better. I still get a little shy. I still feel I was intimidated reaching out to you because I admire your work from afar. So again, for folks who feel like networking is intimidating or they don't want it to feel transactional, or maybe they feel unsafe because they've had so many interactions with folks who they couldn't relate to or who maybe just weren't the nicest people.
Right.
What would you say to someone who feels anxious or resistant to networking as a part of their tool in their toolbox? And how can they approach it in a way that feels less icky?
So I always ask people, first of all, do what feels most natural to you. If it doesn't feel natural to you, for instance, I'm an ambivert. I'm not quite an introvert and I'm not also like the hyper extrovert, right? I'm somewhere in between. And so I get shy sometimes when my introverted self takes over. I also get shy and don't want to talk to people. And I was actually telling a story recently about how somebody on LinkedIn who I thought I was cool with had an event locally. And I reached out to one because to me in the post, it seemed like the person was inviting people to show up to the event. I reached out to say I wanted to attend and they told me, well, they would let me know when they were open to new people. But I was like, wait, you just made the post that said people were welcome, but all of a sudden I'm a new person anyway. So, it was clear to me that they probably didn't want me there, right? That hurts. But one of the things that I also always say is that there are 8 billion people on the planet, right? And just one person, if you put it in perspective like that, like if just one person ignores you or even 10 people ignore you, it doesn't matter. That's just a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the entire world. There are people there who want to help you. There are people there who will respond to you, right? And so if maybe in the past you've reached out to people and gotten ignored, first of all, if you've gotten ignored, one of the things I always say to people is not to take it personally because you never know what's also happening in people's lives. Like, for instance, there are people I've been connected with and I didn't know that they were sick or I didn't know that they had lost a spouse, right? Because they hadn't shared that publicly, but behind the scenes. So if I reached out to that person during that time when they were going through that sickness or they were going through the grief of losing a spouse and they ignored me, it would be unfair for me to say, oh, well, forget them. I reached out to them and they didn't. You don't know what's going on in people's lives. You just don't know, right? And so just always assume that they're ignoring you because maybe there's something going on in their lives, right? That you don't know about. Something probably very, very serious, right? So once I started to do that, it took the pressure off, the rejection, the feeling of rejection reduced. So always think that. Always give people the benefit of the doubt, right? That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is that is what I was kind of saying earlier, is do things that are natural to you. For me, I found that LinkedIn is like such a great networking tool for me, right? I don't go to a lot of networking events. Sometimes, and even the last time I went to an event, I kind of chickened out and left. Like, because and it was an actual in-person event in my local area. I dressed up, I went, I got there and I was like, I can't do this. And I left. So I'm telling you, like, I also feel awkward in in-person events. And so I left and I came home. It was nice to dress up and go and drive somewhere, but I ended up coming back home. But I find that it's most natural for me to connect with people on LinkedIn. So like you said, I'll send somebody an email or I'll send somebody a DM and say, hey, I'd love to chat with you about this thing. And another thing with LinkedIn is that there are people that are pretty visible, and for instance, they post a lot. You can start conversation. You can start the conversation there, comment on their post, interact with them, make it like low pressure at first. And then when they begin to notice you, you can go ahead and, send that request for an informational interview or whatever it is that you want to do with that individual. But do whatever is natural to you. That's going to be more sustainable in the long run than anything. Then last but not least, if there's somebody that you're intimidated to reach out to, trust me, that person is also intimidated by something. So they're human beings just like you. And once I found this out, like that person who has that big platform, that person who has that amazing career, that person who is like almost untouchable is actually touchable. They're just humans, right? And so once you remember that they are humans, they also try, I have a kiddo, they also try to get their children to eat veggies. They also try to get their kids to like clean up after themselves. Like we no matter where we are, and like we all have the same very, very similar problems. Maybe some people have more money in their bank accounts, but we have very, very similar problems. And so be human. That's what I say, is just be human. And if you see that the person really loves like a sports team that you also love, or they're into hiking or cycling, like bring that up. It's so interesting how people respond to that. So be human and just realize that we're all just people, and do what's most natural to you.
I appreciate you reminding us that everybody is human
Yeah.
and to focus on what is natural or easy or
Yeah.
just like low pressure, reduce
Low
that
pressure.
pressure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes one of the things that sometimes is useful is just being helpful, right? So one of the ways that people started getting in touch with me is, like I was saying, I was writing on LinkedIn. Well, first of all, I was sharing my scientific writing work, but later on that morphed into me talking about going through unemployment and getting a science writing career. And so giving out this free information creates a lot of goodwill, right? Because I was helping people out. And I've had so many people, I've lost track, who have reached out to me and say, thank you so much for what you shared. They didn't pay me. I never coached them personally or anything, but by them just reading the content or listening to, my podcast, they got something out of that, and they turned that into action, and they got a job, right? And so building that goodwill has also brought me a lot of goodwill. And I really believe that if you help enough people get what they want, you'll get what you want, right? And so be helpful. It doesn't have to be the same as me, right? Writing and doing a podcast, but you can, in your own way, find a way to be helpful. If you saw that person mention about something, you can say, hey, I have this resource that I think would be great for you. Here it is. Like, just be helpful. And some people will actually, I was just reading something about 33% of people will reach out, will respond, right? And sometimes that number is lower, to be honest. But that's okay. You don't need everybody to respond to you. Just one person will appreciate, your thoughtfulness.
I can only echo everything that you shared right now, especially that last piece of helping, offering goodwill, because it does come back.
Excellent.
For students, PhD students, or folks who are nearing the end of their PhD program where this feels more urgent, the topic of career design, what's one piece of advice you want to leave them with today?
If you're nearing the end of your PhD, first of all, congratulations, you've done so well. Not everybody who starts finishes, so congratulations. Next thing you should do is really think about where you want to be. Think about your life 5 years from now. Where do you want to be? It doesn't have to be perfect, but one of the things that I realize that people are scared of is introspection. Sometimes people want it to be easy. People want somebody to tell them, "Oh, don't choose academia because academia is super toxic," or "Don't choose industry because then you can never come back to academia." People want those easy answers, and there's no easy answer there, right? For some people, academia works so well and they've thrived. For some people, industry works so well and they've thrived. For some people, the nonprofit industry works so well and they've thrived. So I want you to really sit down with yourself and say, self, where do we want to be 5 years from now? And begin to chart that course. And it's not going to, like I said, it can be meandering, it can be very amorphous, but eventually 5 years from now, you are going to find yourself in a place that you are happy with. I find that people who end up not being happy in their jobs never really sat down with themselves and asked, is this what I really want? So ask yourself, what do you really want? Do you love research? Do you want to continue on this path of academia, like this academic path? Then you need to start building relationships within academia that lead you there. Do you want to be in industry? You need to start building relationships ASAP that lead you there, right? If you're nearing the end of your PhD, likely you have, like, I would say if you have 6 months to a year, start doing that. Start working on your resume. Start even like pretend applying just to see if you get responses, right? And take everything that I've said in this episode where you're not just depending on the fact that you have a PhD or you're educated. Those don't open, not anymore. They don't really open doors. What really opens doors is you saying, I'm a problem solver that can solve your problem. So now think about where you want to land. If you take some of the resources that I shared with different career paths for the different PhDs, and you come upon, let's say 3 to 4, and I have a resource also for your audience. I'll share that at the end of this, but you choose like 3 or 4 career paths that you think you want to explore. I say start reaching out to people that have those career paths and start talking to them. Start watching some YouTube videos on it. Go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what those people do. They may have some responses for you. ChatGPT may have some responses for you. Start doing your research so that you have an understanding of, oh, this is the language that they use. These are the expectations that they have. These are the types of problems that this person in this type of role solves. Here's how I can present myself in the best light for this type of role. And trust me, if you do this introspection, if you do that type of research, and also, and sometimes you may not even need to talk to anybody, but also talk to people, you'll find yourself in a much better position than just waiting and expecting that people are going to hire you just because of your shiny PhD.
As we get close to wrapping up, is there any other question you were hoping I would ask you today?
I think you asked me a lot of the questions, but what I do want to tag on is that we're living in a very uncertain time where research funding easily gets cut, or it doesn't flow as easily as it once was. There's a lot of layoffs, there's a lot of stress in the system, right? And so I think it's important. This is why career design is where career design is even more important, is especially in something and then you have AI and technology that's taking over things, and whole industries are being upended, right? And so one of the things that I write in my book, The Navigating the Pivot, towards the end, is create an opportunity engine for yourself. As PhDs, we have these plethora of skills and knowledge and exposure to things that allow us to create opportunity engines. And I'll give an example. One of my friends, Dr. Ramon Goings, is a professor at University of Maryland, Baltimore campus.
Been on the podcast, by the way.
Yeah, Dr. Ramon. So Ramon I got to know him a couple of years ago through LinkedIn, and we've chatted since then. And again, networking, right? We've had conversations, we've done some work together. And I remember, and he is also the CEO of Done Dissertation. Now, I love that. I love that he is a professor who is doing amazing research. He's mentoring students. He's doing all his work, but he has this Done Dissertation business that is like a co-career. And he's created this opportunity engine for himself that should anything happen, he's not like out on the streets. Now, it's not going to be as big. Ramon is fairly successful in that, but it doesn't have to be that big, right? It could be something like, and that's why I love the idea of portfolio careers so much, is you could have a podcast talking about your research area. You could write books. You could speak. You could do all these other things that are not necessarily tied to that just one career path, right? And you can do this in the margins of life. All of us don't have enough margin anyways, but you can do them like 30 minutes each day to create an opportunity engine for yourself that never lets you be tied up by just one income source. These days, I'm very, very adamant about that, and something I'm talking about a little bit more, that because of the uncertainty of the economy, it's great if you have something that is permanent, but that's becoming more and more rare. And so to really think and design an opportunity engine for yourself that doesn't just limit you to one thing or one income source. And that's all I want to say. And for some people, that looks like, it looks so different for so many people. Some people get into real estate, some people invest in the stock market, some people start podcasts, some people write books. Whatever it is, I've been encouraging PhD prepared folks to not just look at one career path as the only source of their income.
So many gems. So many. I completely agree. And I love that you mentioned this as setting up an opportunity engine with like multiple options, and the portfolio career idea too, of you get to design your own career and it can have multiple legs in a stool so that you never fall, fully fall.
Yeah.
So I would love for folks to get a chance to connect with you. So let us know, how can they connect with you? If there's any other resource you want to share, how can they learn more about your work?
Yes, absolutely. So if your listeners go to theboldphd.com/newsletter, there is a button on that page where they can join over 3,000 academics who are on the Bold PhD newsletter. Now, when you sign up for the newsletter, I do send you a career bundle. And here's what is in that career bundle. There is a list of 30 plus non-academic career jobs that you can consider. So if you're thinking about non-academic careers, that's a list that you want to get your hands on so you can think about where you kind of want to land. I also have a list of careers within academia that are not necessarily professor positions. And then there's a networking guide and a personal branding. So basically, a lot of the things I talked about today, I have these guides for you for free. And you can just sign up by going to theboldphd.com/newsletter and hitting that button and joining us, and it will send that to you.
Great. Love to hear it. And I also know they can check you out on LinkedIn. So definitely make sure to connect with Dr. Gertrude. This is amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation, for setting aside some time on your busy calendar for us. And yeah, this is great. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you too.
This conversation really stayed with me, especially Dr. Gertrude's reminder that career uncertainty after the PhD is not a personal failure. It's part of a structural reality that so many of us internalize. I know most of us did not come from programs where they taught us about career options. And I really appreciate that she focused on the topic of intentional career design. She didn't want you to be passively hoping that the right role appears, and instead wants you to actively ask yourself, what kind of life do I want to build, and what kind of role do I want to play in that life? So again, a few key takeaways for you to hold on to is that Your PhD is a container of skills. I love that visual of thinking about your PhD as a container, as a toolbox, and you have multiple things that work in your favor. Career paths outside of academia are not backups. They're not a failure. They're not plan B and C. They can be valid and strategic and your top choice too. And of course, I can't not mention the importance of relationships, of visibility, of building your own opportunities. That's absolutely necessary in any field or any industry. So again, especially in unstable economies, having more than one pathway, having more than one income stream can be a way for you to protect yourself. As you reflect on this episode, please ask yourself, if I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, what kind of work would I want to be doing 5 years from now? And what's one small step I can take this week or this month to expand my future career options? You deserve a career that honors you, your values, your skills, your capacity, and everything that you bring to the table. So make sure you check out the show notes to connect with Dr. Gertrude and access the resources she shared. That's it for today. And as always, I'll talk to you all next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The second way is to get your copy of my free resource kit linked in my show notes. This kit includes tools, worksheets, and podcast playlists on all things grad school, productivity, and personal development. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @Grad School Femtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.